Hi everyone, I'd like to chat to you about some encounters that I've had with God during my hospitalization with COVID in June and July 2021. I had quite a significant illness with COVID, and God practically worked in my life during that period and changed it for all intents and purposes. I tested positive on the Monday. By the Wednesday, I was already very ill. I'm a diabetic, so they couldn't put me on cortisone from day one. I went to hospital on the Wednesday. They gave me cortisone and insulin supplements. At this stage, I control my sugar through tablets, and basically sent me home. There weren't any beds at that point. We were at the crest of Delta, the Delta variant at that stage. By the Saturday, things took a turn for the worse. I was on a call with our Reverend Peter Nell. We prayed together and I shared my stats with him. At that stage, my oxygen had dropped to in the sort of mid-80s. And it wasn't, I was feeling very sick at that point. Peter Nell had a discussion with Robin. Robin spoke to her mom, who is a doctor, who basically said, I need to go to the Olivedale Hospital. At that stage, there weren't any beds, there weren't any ventilators available, but on my way to the hospital, Dr. Irma phoned me and she said to me, there aren't any beds, we know that, there aren't any ventilators, but we pray that by the time that I get there, there would be, and we trust that there would be the facilities and the care available to me that is required. I got to the hospital, within 30 minutes I got a bed in triage, and every step of the way after that, I was able to get a bed or get the treatment and get a ventilator when I needed it. I got admitted on the Saturday, spent the night in the COVID emergency department. On the Sunday morning, they moved me to high care, and within an hour I was moved to the ICU, where the doctor basically said to me that my lung had collapsed at that point, my right lung, the pneumonia had set in, and that they would have to put me on a ventilator for me to survive, essentially, because the lung wasn't coping, and my body's, my oxygen at that stage, even with high flow oxygen supplementation, had basically dropped to the 60s, the mid 60s at that point. What was very telling for me, and I guess this was my first encounter with God during that period, was I was scared, and I told the doctor that I'm scared and I wanted to know what the survival rate is, and she calmed me down and said to me, whose report am I going to trust? Is it going to be God's, or is it going to be the doctor's? And I made a choice at that stage that it would be God's. I've always been someone who believed in God and that He could heal. And what surprised me at that point is that the doctor and all of the nurses basically made a circle around my bed, started praying for me, which is not something we generally expect of doctors in today's age. And I think there was my first real encounter with God through all of this process. 4 days later, my situation turned to a critical state. Some of my organs started failing. My heart started taking a lot of pressure. My sugar was at 30 as a result of all of the cortisone. My lungs were struggling, and my kidneys had effectively stopped working at that point. And they had phoned my wife at that stage to tell her that the situation was critical, and that they would give it a 24-hour period and then make a decision on whether or not they were going to shut down the machines that were keeping me alive at that point. The Friday night arrived, and they came to the same conclusion. The situation hadn't improved. And by Saturday morning, 10:30, they were going to phone my wife to come say goodbye, and then to make the decision to switch off the machines. At 10:27, the last paperwork was done for the decision. At 10:28, there was a global prayer chain that basically was active. There was a men's gathering in the US under David McDonald. They basically stopped everything that they were busy doing, and they started praying at that point. There were people that were praying across the world, Scotland, Ireland, Dubai. There was a Zoom meeting within our church congregation, and there were people from the worship team, some of my work colleagues, one I call my family, my wife, my mom, all were praying for me at that specific stage. And at 10:29, the machine started turning. They couldn't quite explain it, but there was quite a drastic turn in what the machines were telling them. The phone call that was made to my wife at 10:30 wasn't one of, you need to come say goodbye and we need to switch off the machines, but rather that it's going better and that there was a turn that they couldn't quite explain, but there was a turn nonetheless. It was still critical for me, but there was a turn. That was the important point. And I think for me, that was the second big encounter and the point at which I think a lot of my perception, I wasn't awake at that stage, but where my perception of God had changed. And in 3 minutes, He made a big, big difference in my life at that point. I woke up on the Tuesday after that under sedation by myself. Later that morning, they removed the tubes, they switched off the ventilator. And without exception, every doctor that treated me came and sat next to my bed and said to me, what had happened to me can't be explained medically. From a pure medical perspective, I should be dead. And that there was some divine intervention that must have happened to make this possible and for me to be alive. At that stage, I didn't have any use of my legs. Muscle atrophy starts kicking in when they put you in an induced coma and induced paralysis, under which I was at that stage. And basically, I had to learn to walk from scratch. It's natural because your body's used to it, but the point being, the physio sat next to me and said it would take up to 30 days for me to lift my leg against gravity, and that I would have to be in the hospital for a period of 30 to 40 days after that to be able to just walk out of the hospital. At that point, I prayed and I said to God, I'm scared. I cannot be in a hospital for 40 days. I'm an extrovert. Nobody wants to talk to you there. And, mentally, I don't think I would have been able to deal with another 40 days in hospital. I made a commitment at that stage that I would do whatever is needed from a physical therapy perspective, but that I needed God's help to get out of hospital a lot sooner. I wouldn't cope. 4 days later, I stood up by myself. I walked to the bathroom with aid, of course. And 14 days later, I walked out of the hospital by myself. And that for me was the third big encounter with God, in that even though there was a hopeless situation previously, even in the small things, I asked for help and He provided it at that point. When I got home, I struggled a little bit with imposter syndrome for a while. During the period I got sick or ill, my cousin had passed away from COVID as well. And the natural question was, why me? Why was I spared? Why wasn't he spared from COVID? And I think the answer that I got from discussions with Peter Nell and Eloise and several other people in that week is that I've been a part of this congregation since I was 13 years old. I've come a very long way with Peter Nell, with Eloise, with the worship group. I got involved in music as a result of the worship group, and by virtue of my involvement and knowing people, there was additional effort. It was personal for a lot of them. And I don't think I would sit here today if it wasn't for that personal connection with these individuals who use their networks for prayer, for intercession, for fasting. I don't think I would be alive as a result, or if I wasn't involved and if I wasn't as close to the people as I was. And then I think the second bit is that I've always been a believer. I've always believed in God. Ever since I was very young, I've always been steadfast in my religion, even when challenged. So I think the relationship with God, knowing people, and being connected and being part of a congregation and being or actively being involved in a congregation is the reason why I'm here today, and I'm thankful that I'm here today. I hope this testimony will encourage everyone that looks to it or at least watches it, and just know that God still heals today, miracles still happen today, and job. If you're not involved, get involved, and build those personal connections. You never know when you may need it. Thanks.